Thank you everyone for joining us for this awesome panel and documentary as it relates to class and economic inequality. My name is Carlos Aguilar. I'm a film critic in Los Angeles, and I'm very happy to have this wonderful group of filmmakers with us today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us the film that they have playing at New York Film Festival this year. Why don't we start with you, Luis?
Okay, well, my name is Luis López Carrasco. I'm from Spain. I used to work in a collective, experimental documentary collective called Los Hijos, but I've been making films on my own for the last years. The first one was called El Futuro, who was premiered in New York Film Festivals, and the second one, The Year of the Discovery, is going to be premiered this year. So I'm happy to say everybody hello, and yeah, that's me.
Heidi?
My name is Heidi Ewing, and the film I have at the New York Film Festival is Te Llevo Conmigo, I Carry You With Me, which is a Mexican-American co-production. It's my first narrative film, but I've been making documentaries for 15 years. And my film premiered Friday night at the Queens Drive-In.
And Mr. Wiseman?
Yeah, I'm Fred Wiseman. I had City Hall in the New York Film Festival, and I usually live in Boston or Cambridge, and I'm presently in Paris, quarantined in Paris.
Great. Thank you, all of you guys, for joining us. I wanted to start by, thinking a little bit about how over the last few years, not only the United States, but the world has taken sort of a regression into populism and, very dangerous territories, and relating to class and race and inequality that we see all over the world. How has this moment influenced the way that you see your work and the type of questions that you're asking yourself as an artist? Has it changed? These questions have been around forever, but these last few years feel like we have an intensified conversation on them.
You asking me?
Sure.
Well, I haven't. The last movie I made was in America, in Boston. I haven't made anything in Paris, but I haven't found any particular difference in the way I shoot. How the people who were in my films respond. I don't. In shooting these films, with the exception of City Hall, where there was some political discussion and some discussion of the consequences of the Trump presidency, most of the time, in the kinds of places where I make movies, there's very little political discussion. There's very little discussion of any ideas of any sort. It's mainly people going about their lives in ways that they always have.
I think that I always focus on very similar themes. I'm interested in people who are, searching for their own identity and fighting to, live the life that they want for themselves. So that could apply to One of Us, my film about the Hasidic community, following three people as they exit the community and try out the secular world because of their curiosity, because of their desires. I'm interested in that theme. In my recent film, I Carry You With Me, I follow two men who leave Mexico because they have dreams for themselves. They have desires that they think can be met in the United States. So while you could look at both of those films right now, and you could find, if you look for a political lens, especially right now, that really wasn't the initial reasoning for making the film. I do think that people are bringing with them, the viewer, the audience is bringing with them right now a whole new set of questions. And I think all films that are being made, especially documentaries, can sort of be colored through different lenses now because of the cultural and social moment we're in. But it hasn't really changed the type of work that I make or that I plan on making, I'd say.
Right. I think, for instance, if I had made City Hall when Obama was president, the reaction would have been different to the film, right? Because have seen Mayor Walsh, Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, is an accomplished man. He wants to help people, and he set in place a whole bunch of programs, and he's accomplished quite a bit. But because of Trump, there's such a stark contrast between Trump's idiocies and a politician who really cares and is making a sincere and genuine effort to accomplish something. I mean, in a sense, Trump made City Hall more of a political film than it otherwise might have been.
That's totally true with my film, I Carry You With Me, which follows two men who are undocumented, who've been living in the country for 20 years. And I started making the film under Obama. I wrote the film under Obama. I started shooting the film under Obama. We considered not making the film anymore when Trump was elected out of fear, and also of how the film would be perceived as some sort of very large political statement. So it's not that I would have avoided that, but that really wasn't the center of the story. So I think even my film has it, you take different things away from it now after 4 years of Donald Trump. I think that's okay. I think that's fine. I think that's beautiful. It's an evolution. It's unexpected, but it doesn't really change the initial take that I had as an artist. So I think it's just very interesting to watch how the meanings change of your own work.
I
Well,
agree.
yeah, in my case, I have to say that the national context, it had an impact on me and my career. The economical crisis of 2008 that arrived strongly to Spain in 2010 changed the ideas, the aesthetical ideas or the objectives of my own filmmaking, because from that moment, the feeling in Spain of collapse was huge. My generation had to migrate and go to another places to work. And then I had the feeling that I wasn't able to understand my country anymore, because the place that I was raised, the place I grew up, doesn't exist anymore. So I started to make films about Spanish recent history, trying to understand what happened and why our current situation was so critical, because I needed tools to understand my situation. I was completely lost, and yes, and so I can think that at last years we were experimenting some attempts of revolution. I mean, of trying to change things in Spain, but also in the whole globe. I mean, with the square movements in the 2011, and at the same time with the stronger rise of feminism. And I think these big waves have created a strong reaction, and we are living in the middle of a strong reaction that can lead us to lose our democracies, or to be part of more authoritarian countries. And I try to discuss all these aspects in the film I present.
Perhaps the idea that we all come with our politics and our views to watching a film, but do you feel that now more than ever it's almost impossible to watch a film that touches on any social issue not related to what's happening in the world? Is it fair to the art, or is it just logical to sort of try to project those what we're living as a society onto the work, for anyone that wants to do that?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but for example, but because of my understanding of the English, not because of anything. For example, my film is about things that happen in Spain, but in a very, very small particular town in the southeast in 1992. It's connected to the industrial crisis that was happening in Spain while the Olympic Games and the Universal Exhibition, the Expo de Sevilla, was held. I mean, you have this image of a wonderful country, a celebration country, and at the same time, there were a lot of workers losing their jobs. And in 1992, the workers burned the regional parliament, the parliament of that region, in a fight against the police. I was doing a film about 1992, But in the end, what happened in 1992 with the defeat of the unions, it has been affecting Spanish society nowadays, because that region felt so abandoned that now is voting far-right parties. I mean, far-right parties could win the elections if there is elections now in Spain in that area. So I think for me, it's important to connect what happened in the last years to understand why there is this situation of far-right parties everywhere.
I think actually that for me personally as a viewer, as an audience member, I think that the thing that most colors my view of fiction and nonfiction that I'm watching right now, I'm also in production on something, is COVID. I feel like watching films now that were shot before COVID, I am often distracted by, there's 40 people in that room, everyone's hugging and kissing. When will we do that again? I miss the community, I miss the touch. I wonder when we'll be able to film a scene like that again or experience that again. For me personally, my viewing of all films right now is more through the lens of COVID than of any specific political persuasion. I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but I'm feeling that very, very strongly, and also how it's going to affect documentaries and fiction going forward in new productions. What are we going to be able to see and experience as storytellers under this pandemic? So for me, that is the thing that my brain goes to first before any political context. Maybe that will fade away with time. Maybe it's trauma, but I think a lot of audiences' brains are going directly there while watching things that were shot before.
Mr. Wiseman, anything to add?
Well, no, I'm afraid I'm allowing myself to be distracted by things that were watched before. I mean, I have so much fear on an everyday basis. I find watching old movies distracting, and particularly comedies. I watched a great Preston Sturges movie recently, Sullivan's Travels, which is a movie that's very relevant to today. And I was completely absorbed in the movie. And I was thankful that I was. And for an hour and a half, I didn't think about COVID. But most of the time, I'm not watching movies, and I'm totally absorbed in trying to avoid catching it.
Going forward, since Heidi, for example, you were making this film before this moment, is going forward, will that be sort of a part of your thinking, or not only COVID, but what the last 4 years have been for everyone? Like I'm wondering, like, if perhaps the films that we're seeing now haven't yet reflected this moment, and we will be seeing that in the future.
As someone said to me the other day, another filmmaker, he said, I think it's a good time for filmmakers to stand back. He was talking, I think, about documentary. He says, I think it's a time for us to stand back because this is a moment for journalists. This is a moment for journalism, for news, because filmmakers, fiction and nonfiction, you sort of make sense of a moment, you interpret a moment, you meditate on something, and then you put it through your creative process, you bring it to the people. I don't think any of us are able to absorb what's happening right now. So I thought that was an interesting point. I don't plan on stepping aside and not making work, but I am attracted right now to stories, to tell stories that are not about this exact moment because of that fear, because I don't know what I'm trying to say. What can I offer a viewer, me personally, when I haven't been able to unpack anything that's going on properly? So I'm definitely cautious about, what to do next. We started making a documentary about endangered journalists around the world before COVID, and we started shooting in December. And then COVID happened, and of course, all of the journalists are only covering COVID. And the concept of endangerment is not just from governments, It's from this virus that they're covering. So the entire meaning of that film changed under my feet, and we must complete the film. And it's hard to know, because it's like, what can we offer the viewers what they haven't already experienced? What kind of insight can we provide? And I'm worried about it, because we're in it. And so I think it's definitely a real concern on that film. And then in terms of narratives I'm developing and films I'm developing, nothing has anything to do with this moment. I'm attracted to things that happened in the past. I'm developing a film that happens in the 1960s in the former Soviet Union. I think that's by design. I don't know, I wouldn't know how to make sense of this moment right now, and I wouldn't try to.
Luis, for you made a film about 1992. How has the making of it sort of change or shape the stories that you want to tell in the future? Are there sort of more multiple veins of that story that you want to pursue in terms of the repercussions of that year, and how it shaped the Spanish reality today?
Yeah, well, I have the same feelings that my partner said, that it's very difficult now to understand how this is affecting us, because it's affecting us in a very, very straight way. So sometimes you have to focus in recover the small portions of your life that are not affected by the strange situation. And yeah, I mean, I didn't think very much of new projects. But for me, the idea of making this film was making the portrait of a lot of social groups that disappeared from media, from television, from literature, and from cinema in the 80s and in the 90s. It looks like when democracy arrived to Spain, there was this idea that everybody became middle class from one day to the other. But the real thing that it is that there was this huge mainstream institutional objective of selling ourselves as Spaniards, that we were going to be wealthy, we were going to be modern, and we were going to be all middle class. So there was this idea of producing films about literary adaptation of 19th century and middle class urban comedies. So I think there is a connection between the media and the movies that we have seen and how we remember ourselves as society. But the real point, and that's one of the main objectives, is that there were a lot of social groups, like the people in the outskirts of the cities, people in the industrial fabric, people in the rural areas, and of course another minorities that arrived to Spain in the 90s that hasn't been portrayed at all. So I think we need to, as country, to expand the view of all these stories that affected to many different people that wasn't part of the image anymore. Because I think that the situation we live now, it's connected to forgetting what we were. And I saying this because I still have this commitment of doing new films about all the things that were invisible while we were thinking that we were a rich country.
Right. Mr. Wiseman, I know that your film doesn't have a sort of an overt political discourse. None of your films do. But how do you think that or do you feel that class, just the inherent presence of these class issues that we're facing affects or shapes the work, in particularly City Hall?
Well, I don't really, I think in a different way. I don't think in ideological terms. I don't think in terms of theories, because I've never found a theory satisfactory as an explanation of what I'm seeing and hearing. So I think I work in a bit of a reverse fashion. I just start with the thought that City Hall, if I hang around a City Hall long enough, I might find a movie. And the movie, in one sense, is what what I found, is a report on what I found and what the experience of shooting the movie and editing the movie have meant to me. So I don't think in terms of language of class, as far unless perhaps I do unconsciously. But that's not what motivates me. What motivates me is more a wish to learn something and have the final film be a summary of what I've learned. I give you briefly give an example. In 1968, I made a film about the emergency ward of Metropolitan Hospital in New York, the emergency wards and the clinics. And at that point, it was the only city hospital serving the area from 42nd Street to 125th Street. And they had something like 500,000 emergency ward and clinic cases a year. And the doctors and nurses worked their asses off. I mean, frequently putting in 20 or 24-hour shifts. And there was a Marxist critic that wrote a review of the film saying the film didn't show how the white doctors and nurses exploited the Black and Hispanic patients. Well, my experience, and I spent quite a bit of time in the emergency ward and clinic, is that the white doctors and nurses, and certainly all the doctors and nurses weren't white, but the white doctors and nurses did not in any way exploit the patients, the Black and Hispanic, or patients of other races. They worked their asses off to help people as best they could. And so that it's sort of the ideological critique sort of amused me because it had absolutely nothing to do with the reality.
What were you trying to learn, or what did you learn in the making of City Hall? Was there sort of something, an idea or anything that you learned from that?
Well, I mean, the real answer to the question is what you see in the film. And the film is long, it's 4.5 hours. And I'm reluctant to, to offer a 25-word summary or a 50-word summary of a 4.5 hour movie. But, having said that, I'll have a minor go at it in the sense that what I learned is that city government is much closer and touches the lives of the citizenry more than any other form of government, more than state government or federal government. And it's necessary because it sets limitations on behavior. And we see the activities of the police, who have a monopoly of violence. We see the activities of the fire department, public health, the rules that govern not only construction of houses where people live, but apartment buildings and skyscrapers. And the city imposes rules. It imposes rules for restaurants. So it imposes rules for traffic, for licensing different kinds of businesses and professions. So that I was particularly struck by the intimate relationship that city government has on our daily lives. And that's, I think, one of the things that that's at least one of the things that I discovered in the course of spending 10 weeks hanging around City Hall. And all of that, at least based on my experience, defies ideological explanation. Sure, some of the services could be, some of the services were very, offered very successfully, and some of the services could be offered in a more satisfactory form. But what was interesting was to see people making a genuine effort to provide those services.
Mm-hmm. Heidi, with your film, Would I Carry You With Me, these two men, your subjects and characters, since your film is a hybrid of fiction or narrative and documentary, they leave Mexico because of the lack of opportunities to sort of like find a more prosperous future, as well as of the homophobia and other issues. But, without spoiling it, we see that, you know, to an extent they've achieved that prosperity in economic terms, but there's still sort of all their, you know, issues that keep them at bay in terms of like being equal to other people. I don't know if you grasp what I'm trying to say. So they've reached, you know, their own restaurants and sort of, you know, have that prosperity, but they're still on the margins in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, my film is about, you know, the limits of the American dream, but also the price one pays. There's a price that you pay, that we all pay for choices we make. And the price is very high for these men who left Mexico for a variety of reasons. There was a socioeconomic reason, which I think many people are very familiar with, but there was also the desire to try one's luck and to try one's talent out in a place that it might be better received. There was also the sense that they were from a small conservative town and they wouldn't be able to live openly as a gay couple. And they came here also for the social freedoms. I don't think that the calculus that my characters had in their minds when they were 26 and left included the idea that they might never see Mexico again, that one might never see his son again, that they would reach ownership of 3 restaurants and find economic stability and a small sense of fame in the restaurant industry and respect. They achieved all of those things, but yet there is the unease that they feel of their status as immigrants, as the fear of deportation, as, you know, the guilt for leaving home, for leaving their parents and and one man's case, his child. And the film really is a meditation on, you know, the choice you make and how you can't really, you're not going to have all the elements that you want to achieve in your life. You have to give something up. In the case of immigrants, they give up a lot. Legal, undocumented, documented. You lose something when you cross over, and when you make your life here. You also have a lot to gain. But there is always that sense, at least in my subjects and a lot of people that I know and I've spoken to, of like, there's still a sense of homelessness. Because were they to go back to Mexico today, it's not the same country they remember. It's not the same country they told me about that I brought forth in the movie. It's a completely new place. It's a different place, and would they even fit in there? So really, it is that there's that sense of sort of like the sort of the nomadic, the slightly homeless sense that even you can have when you're successful in this country, and that is something that I learned by listening to the real men tell me their story and talking to many people, and I tried to imbue the film with that sense, that with that tension and that nostalgia and that slight sense of regret. And what if I hadn't left? What if I'd made a different choice? And these are unanswerable questions that, you know, I tried to bring across cinematically. But it's funny because a lot of people who've seen the film approach me, and even like children of immigrants, and they'll say, oh, my father and my parents are from Iran, and now I know in a way what they went through because they've never gone back. And now I have a new appreciation of that tenuous position that they live in even 20, 30, 40 years on in this country.
You know, were you always, you know, certain that you wanted to make it a hybrid, or did you ever consider to go full fiction or full documentary? At what point did you decide on this convergence between the two?
Well, the film is based on my friends, and when they first told me their story, my first instinct as a documentary filmmaker with a lot of experience was this could be an amazing documentary. I know how to make them. I would know how to do it. And it's you know, it was a little less daunting of a task, but I realized pretty quickly while filming them that I was shooting the third act of a movie, and that all that had happened in their childhood and their past in Puebla, meeting all of the life of being a gay man in Puebla in the early 90s, I would never be able to achieve a satisfying cinematic rendition of that story, and I didn't want to give it up. And that's when I decided I would write the movie and make it into mainly a narrative. And then I had to make the choice of whether to cast actors to play them at their current age And I decided that the material that I had with them was real, searing, touching, and that no one could do better, that no actors could do better to play that moment in their life. And I made the decision to do something unorthodox and keep both. And so it really wasn't too hard of a decision at all, because I didn't want to part with that very, very strong material of the real people.
Luis, for your film, tell us a little bit about the construction of building this film from the past, and sort of like mining meaning from footage and creating, from your perspective, building something from footage that's from a long time ago and giving it a current context.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief because it's a bit of a long process. I was thinking of doing a film close to my first film, the one in El Futuro, which was portraying a party of young people in 1982. And that film was like a reenactment of a party. It was like found footage, a home movie that somebody made, and then you found it. And the idea was quite radical in the way that music was so loud that you weren't able to listen to any dialogue. And then I was doing this idea about what happened in Cartagena in 1992, why the situation was so explosive that they decided to burn the parliament. And I have the same idea of having many people inside a place and behaving themselves and trying to reenact 1992. What happened to my screenwriter and me was that when we started to do the research and starting to speak to the original union leaders that participated in the riots, the main idea was that they were going to be a source to make them to write dialogues about their experiences, and then looking for non-actors and non-actresses, workers that could make of these people, no? But when we found these people, and because nobody knows in Spain about this banned parliament, it's a so forgotten story. When we met all these people, that most of them were part of the Communist Party in the anti-Franco struggle in the dictatorship, I have the feeling that they had to be in the film. Their voices, their faces had to be in the film. And so as we were doing the research, we were doing open castings of workers or unemployed people in Cartagena, because the idea all the time was mixing these both times, 1992 and the current times. I mean, to make this very big collective portrait about the working class neighborhoods of Cartagena, to understand what happened to all these social groups along the time. So as we were doing open castings and the people was telling about their stories, about their projects, about their works, we were less doing this reenactment to make more a straight documentary that it's just people in a cafeteria speaking about their concerns and discussing about many, many, many aspects. It's a 45 characters film. And it grew so much that in the end, it's a kind of super portrait about the working class from the end of the Civil War to nowadays. But the main point is that the burning of the parliament in 1992, it's a kind of important point that has affected what happened in the last 20 years. Even though we kept this idea of temporary ambiguity, because we shot the film with high-end cameras from the 90s, and the cafeteria where the bar is located is, it looks like the 90s, as at the same time, the participants are speaking about themselves and are being themselves, but they are dressed as if they could be in the 90s or nowadays. So at the beginning of the film, you are not sure if you are watching a documentary located in the 90s or nowadays, because for me, the idea was connecting two crises, 1992 and the current one, with the stories of the social class that suffered most. Yeah. So, and the Fred Wiseman films, in fact, were a major reference to build and to structure all these films, because it's a very spoken word film about many about communities speaking about their concerns.
So yeah, Mr. Wiseman, you clearly were excited about City Hall, but I wanted to ask you about another film of yours from recent years, In Jackson Heights, which I feel, as Lucy's saying, it's a portrait of our community. And I wanted to ask you, what was the sort of the inception of that interest in Jackson Heights, and what were you hoping to capture there?
Well, I wasn't the first to recognize that America is a country of immigrants. And I wanted to have a look, since my father was an immigrant to America in 1890. We came from the Ukraine when he was 5 years old. And I grew up, and he became a lawyer, and he helped people who came to America during the course of his career as a lawyer. And so I was interested in having a look at a contemporary community of immigrants, because my father was part of the great wave from Eastern and Western Europe at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. And Jackson Heights was a community mainly of people from East Asia, and I wanted to see, and from South America, and I wanted to see what their life was like and how they got along. And a friend of mine lived in Jackson Heights, and I told her about my interest in making the movie, and she walked me around one day, and just visually, I didn't know much about it beyond my first impression of it, seeing all that color on the street and people's clothes and their faces. I thought it might make an interesting film. So I started to hang out there and spend about 3 months there, just picking up sequences, and then it took me about a year to put it together. But my interest was to see what a contemporary immigrant community looked like. My motivation.
Heidi, you've also had another film in your catalog that I find particularly interesting about Detroit and sort of what happened to that city. Can you talk a little bit about that moment that now seems a little distant, but if one looks at that case, it feels ominous and like a cautionary tale almost.
It's so interesting to bring that up, because the makers of Detropia, myself, my co-director Rachel, and our editor and our cinematographer, we're all very close friends, and that was an epic experience. I'm from Detroit originally, and I got to go home and live there for the first time, and for many months. And it really is a symphony of a city film. And of course, all of us borrow from Mr. Wiseman and have studied his work and are influenced by his work, that intense observational muscle, which was very worked strongly on Detropia. But we were just talking about it the other day, because the film is about, the rise and the fall and the quote rise question mark at the time of Detroit. And the last line in the film is the tavern owner, Mr. Tommy Stevens, who is the only Black owner of a jazz club in Detroit, and the first one. He says, "It's coming to you," to the rest of the country. He says, you look at Detroit, you think, then look at what happened to Florida, look at the implosion of the economy, and he's sort of making sense. He's tying Detroit into a national narrative that you can't avoid the effects of sort of the economic system that we've chosen, the haves and the have-nots, the winners and the losers. And while the film was about Detroit, he basically says, it's coming to you. It's coming to you. And then he takes a swig of his beer and he goes, that's just my opinion. And it's one of those moments where it resonates. The movie was 2012, and it's like, this isn't the end of the story of Detroit or the end of the story of the United States, or there's like more to come from the economic system that we're living under, and the choices we've made as people. So I you know, as a documentary filmmaker, as a filmmaker, period, you know, you're hoping you're making work that can resonate beyond, you know, the moment. And we knew when we were making the film that there was some greater resonance. This wasn't really a film about my hometown at all. It was a film about industry. It was a film about, you know, automation. It was a film about economic shortcuts. It was a film about health insurance. It was a film about, you know, unemployment and dignity and so many things that all are represented so strongly in that film. So I definitely have, it's, you know, a few people have asked us very recently in the last few weeks if they could show it, if they could borrow it, if they could teach it. And of course the answer is always yes, 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 whatever you want, whenever you want. But it really has been in the last few months that there's been a resurgence of interest in Detropia. And I think that that goes back to sort of your initial question, which was sort of what's on the mind of people right now, and how is this political moment influencing what we watch and what we want to watch and how we watch it. And so somehow Detropia, which was a film that was at Sundance in 2012, you know, feels very, very topical and worth revisiting just because of the moment we're in right now. And that's always a very, very satisfying, as a storyteller, it's a satisfying occurrence because we all want to make things that resonate beyond the you know, the minute in which you created it. So yeah, I think of all the films I've been involved in, that one really has the biggest message for 2020. Than the others.
You know, when we think about, you know, economics and class in relation to filmmaking, it's also a conversation of who gets to make films, who gets to tell stories, because making movies is so expensive. So, you know, learning how to make movies is also, you know, going to film school, but not. How do you guys feel about sort of the democratization of the art form and how that will change the types of stories that we see simply by who gets to tell them?
I would love to hear Mr. Wiseman's take on this conversation of the moment, really, about who gets to tell what stories. I'm happy to weigh in, but I'd prefer to hear from Mr. Wiseman first on this.
I mean, on the one hand, a lot more people are going to have a chance to make movies, but it's also true, I mean, and at the risk of sounding snotty, there doesn't mean there are going to be a lot more good movies made, because the number of good movies is always very small. And I think in addition to the democratization of the equipment, I would like to see something also that's connected to the stretching of the minds, so that the ideas and the characters that are presented in the movies are interesting and aren't cliches. I think one thing is that will happen is that there'll be a few more imaginative movies made and a lot more bad movies made. And you know, at the risk of sounding snotty, I nevertheless said that.
Heidi, anything you want to add? Or Luis?
Well, I was thinking that, I mean, in my opinion, that would be, I mean, historically, the filmmaking or the art or literature is being created for the same social class, you know, the bourgeois, the high class, middle class, you know? So I think a lot of how could be possible to create a network of film schools, or I mean, how to support institutionally the possibility that other social groups could be handling the media, the strategies to make films. So in a way, I think that would be a good future for movies, even though they are not good movies or not. but I have the feeling, maybe in my country, that there are a lot of. It's not about making films about invisible collectives. It's about trying to support or um, to support these collectives to make the films they want, that they want. And yeah, that's one of the ideas that I thinking lastly.
But there's, I mean, you know, I started making movies before there was a film school in every corner, and so people of my generation, they apprenticed themselves to somebody for a while, and then decided they would strike out on their own. And I occasionally get to talk at film schools, and I am constantly struck at the illiteracy of the students, that they haven't read anything to speak of, and not being acquainted. I mean, they have, the history of movies is only about 125 years, but the history of great literature is a couple of thousand years. And I'm constantly surprised at the absence of knowledge of great books and great, and the great ideas of the past, and the absence of an analytical capacity, and this emphasis on video games and comic books. It's not a matter of more people having access to equipment or more film schools. God knows we've got enough film schools already. But it's more having experiences and having the capacity to think about those experiences and organize it in an imaginative and new way. I'm not sure that can be taught, but I know that if people's experiences rooted in reading and seeing how people have dealt with organizing their reaction to their own period, their own time through great literature, that some of that will rub off into and help contemporary filmmakers. I'm tired of equipment wraps. Which microphone did you use? The Sennheiser 4X22R3 or the R16 or the blah, blah, blah. And the technology should be at the service of the material, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question, when you first brought this up, Carlos, about who gets to make these films, I think it's a very potent conversation happening in fiction and nonfiction right now in the United States. Of course, it's like, is it all right that you've got, white privileged people telling the stories of Black and brown people? Is it okay that you've got white men telling the story of a relationship between two women? This is the question in our industry right now, and it's a very uncomfortable question. It's very fraught. There's a lot of angry conversations happening on Facebook around certain films about the lack of diversity on the crew. I think it's a very, very important conversation to have. I think if there's, there's more access to women, Black people, brown people, LGBTQ people, like in a writer's room, access to financing, access to opportunity is hands down important, because it'll diversify and make more interesting the type of stories that do get told, and certain stories will get told that would not have been told. I don't think there's any denying that. I do think it is dangerous to decide that if you're not exactly from a specific community, you're not allowed to make a film about that specific community. I mean, I am a white woman from Detroit, and I made a film in Mexico about two gay men who emigrate to the United States. I spent 8 years doing the work. I spent years interviewing them, going to see their families, asking questions. I leaned on my crew. I did so much work so I could be a good vehicle and be and bring this story to the world in my own way, but I'm not from that community. So, you know, I feel like, you know, if you do your work, if you do it right, if you don't cut corners, if you take the time, you can tell stories about anyone. I think that's what an artist should be allowed to do. That does not change the conversation, or that does not take the focus away from the fact that we must encourage and give more financing and opportunity to minority filmmakers, and to women who, like, when it comes to directors, we are in a vast minority in fiction and nonfiction in terms of opportunity. So I think we can have this conversation, but I you know, at the same time, I don't think one should preclude the other. I don't know. What do you think, Carlos? What do you think of this conversation that's happening? I'm curious. It's a very important moment, I think.
I mean, yeah, I think you're right. I feel like a film like I Carry You With Me, you know, has that element of feeling authentic because of the work behind it, and that's not always the case. So there's a balance to be found there, and a certain respect for the material and for the stories being told that some films have and some don't. But I do think that there's two important conversations to be had about the industry and the stories that get told, who gets to tell them, and how they're told. So. I think that's all the time we have. So I really thank all of you guys for being here with us, for everyone watching, and to Luis, Mr. Wiseman, and Heidi, thank you so much for your insight and for being here with us. And thank you to the New York Film Festival for hosting us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.